Welcome to SuperReturn Africa. With me today is Alison Klein, Manager Private Equity with FMO. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
Where are we in the cycle right now in Africa?
I think we're at a bit of a low point in the cycle in Africa. When I started coming to this conference about 7 years ago, we were definitely at a moment of exuberance. A lot of new LPs were coming into Africa. The Economist had published an issue, Africa Rising. There was a lot of optimism about the continent and a lot of new capital flowing in. I think we're now at a point where a lot of investors who committed once to a private equity fund in Africa are hesitating to make the second commitment. There are actually a handful of new investors that are starting to look again, but I think the exuberance has worn off a lot. So we're at a point where the returns have been a bit disappointing over the past few years. Investors are starting to ask themselves, is the return coming from African private equity sufficient to compensate for the perceived risk? There's been quite a lot of capital that's flowed in, and I think we're still waiting to see the exits coming back. So I would say it's a point of a bit less optimism than we had for a while. And at the same time, I think the outlook is still very good. So if we think about the sort of underlying macroeconomic drivers, population growth, urbanization, growing middle class, these are all still very much in place, as well as increasing inclusion and access to financial products and other products and services for a growing population. There's still a lot of reason for optimism, but this is a bit of a down moment, I think, in the subjective experience, in the mood.
Yeah, almost like a time to reflect.
Maybe that's one way to look at it.
And then in terms of the role of DFIs, I mean, DFIs in general have been in the continent quite a few years. Is the role changing at all in the current cycle?
I think there's two ways to look at that. One is that indeed DFIs probably were some of the first investors into African private equity. So there's a bit of a role of paving the way for others. And that's evolved as over time there have been waves of more capital coming in. So we've been really co-investing with commercial investors at times. When the commercial investors are less enthusiastic, the market tends to fall back on a primarily DFI funded period. So I think one role is sort of providing that sort of steady commitment to the continent and to private equity funds here that enables the industry to keep going even as the pendulum of investor appetite swings back and forth. I think the other sort of development that you've seen in the role of DFIs is from providing capital. I think we've always had some environmental and social requirements, but I'd like to think we're evolving more into a role of an advisor and a partner as opposed to just providing finance, and see our role as well as providing capital to really try to partner with GPs as they're thinking about the long-term sustainability of the firm, thinking about the long-term sustainability of the industry. And I do have to say that we're seeing an increasing set of commercial fund of funds that are active in the market as well. So I don't think DFIs are the only ones that are committed to the market, but we're really partnering with some of those commercial investors in the continent as well.
Do they tend to be African fund of funds or global international fund of funds?
You'll see both. So there's a number of Africa-specific ones, South Suez, Sengo, Mbuyu Capital, but also ones like Avance and 57 Stars that are looking at global emerging markets. So there's both.
And then in terms of going forward, say 10 to 15 years' time, where do you see the challenges for Africa and also the opportunities? You've referred to some of them earlier, but 15 years down the line, where will we be?
Well, I hope the opportunities will be that we've made a lot of progress on the challenges that we face today. There's been a lot of progress over the past 10 to 15 years. We had a speaker this morning from the Ghanaian Ministry of Trade and Finance and a number of other previous ministries who was speaking about the need for infrastructure, for cooperation between countries and lowering of trade barriers. So I think as those challenges continue to be resolved, currencies and fluctuations of currencies are one of the big challenges that we see now. If you would see more economic cooperation, consolidation maybe to a smaller number of currencies that are more widely used across countries, I think those are some of the developments that might contribute to a more stable, predictable, and business-friendly operating environment.
Alison, it's always a pleasure to see you at SuperReturn Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dorothy.